Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Remade Life podcast. I'm giving you a more inside look at who I am, what I do, and how I arrived at a different perspective on autoimmune disease. I'm Coach Danny. Let's talk about it. Are you ready to rewrite your story and embrace a new perspective on healing autoimmune disease? Hey, I'm Daniela Spear, and I'm fascinated by exploring the human body, movement, and how emotions help to create our life's journey. After a transforming experience helped me to heal over 15 years of autoimmune symptoms, I decided to share what it looks like to have a second chance at a more compassionate relationship with my body. In this podcast, I will guide you in building lasting wellness by tapping into your body's innate wisdom, understanding the emotional roots of autoimmune disease, and how to use strength training not just for working out, but as a tool to heal from within. So get ready to revive your most inner joys, rebuild your health, and reclaim your life. This is the Remade Life podcast. Hello. So I wanted to take an episode to introduce myself and share the story of how I got to where I am now. The story of my journey through autoimmune disease and my career are so intricately connected, it's really hard to separate the two. So, as I dip my toes into different platforms, I recognize that I'm reaching different people on each one. People on Instagram are there for entertainment and some quick bits of information. People on YouTube are there for videos. And for my auditory people, well, you're here on the podcast. So everyone might not know who I am or what I do or how I got to this place of looking at autoimmune disease from a different lens than traditional medicine. So that is what I'm sharing today. I'm Daniela. Sometimes I go by Coach Danny or just Danny. I've always been Daniela, but early in my career, I was coaching a lot of classes, and for some reason, people had a really hard time pronouncing my name. So I would just say, you can call me Danny. And that is sort of how Coach Danny was born. That's how it kind of originated. But to my professional colleagues, to my friends, my family, I'm still Daniela. Coach Danny or just Danny sort of became more of a client-facing name that I still use today, but it's not exclusively tied to clients. So if you ever become a client of mine, you can still call me Daniela or Danny. Either one is fine. What I never like to be called is Danielle. That's just not my name. I used to pretend not to care if people called me Danielle, but I really did care, and I would just silently suppress my frustration. But then I started to speak up for myself, and now when someone calls me Danielle, I kindly remind them that my name is Daniela. I just think it's important to address people by their correct names and not give them a nickname unless they have a nickname, but not give them a nickname simply because we can't pronounce their name. I believe people's names are an important part of who they are, and oftentimes there's a story or a history as a part of that name. So I try to make an effort to correctly pronounce someone's name, and I will often ask for verification as to whether or not I'm pronouncing it correctly. So just make sure you take the time to learn someone's name. Anyways, that's enough about my name. I am a restorative movement practitioner, which is most definitely a title I gave to myself. So let's unpack that. My schooling and training is in exercise and sports science from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Go Tar Heels. And as a part of my degree, I got certified as a personal trainer. My career in the fitness industry actually started at UNC Campus Recreation. I was working at the check-in desk. And after that, I took a group fitness certification course and started teaching classes. And then after that is when I got my personal training certification. A couple of years after I had graduated, I became a certified health coach. And around that same time is when I also became a business owner for the first time. That was in 2016 when I officially registered Healing in Motion as an LLC. That was the first name of my business. I wanted to teach people living with autoimmune disease how to implement better lifestyle practices through health coaching and exercise. And a lot of what I was doing was more education based within the lupus community. So I was diagnosed with lupus when I was in high school. And during college, when I was no longer playing sports, I started working out. And I realized that exercise, specifically strength training, was helpful for me to manage autoimmune symptoms. Most of the time, you'll hear me refer to it as autoimmune disease or autoimmune symptoms rather than lupus. I just don't love using the word lupus anymore. Not to pretend it doesn't exist, but because to me the word lupus is a label given to a specific set of autoimmune symptoms experienced by the body. I'm going to actually dive deeper into this transition of why I don't really refer to it as lupus anymore. I'll dive into that in the next episode. But the main point I want to make here is that I've learned to refer more to my own body's experience rather than the experience of this other thing creating disease in my body. So if you hear me referring to my experience with autoimmunity as autoimmune symptoms rather than specifically calling it lupus, that is why. Okay, so I got my health coaching certification. I launched Healing in Motion, and I wanted to teach people a better approach to living with autoimmune disease. And a couple of years later, I became a certified strength and conditioning specialist. I was also working with a company called Exos at the time, a human performance company that primarily worked with professional athletes, but I worked in the corporate fitness sector of things. And it was there that I started learning more about recovery, which was not something I regularly practiced. Things like breath work, meditation, soft tissue work, mobility, massage, sleep. Those were all things that, fit into my personal fitness journey just whenever I would think about them. So not really on a regular basis. To be fair, I did practice mobility quite a bit, but I was definitely also overtraining, and I didn't have a great sense of balance when it came to fitness. I didn't have that work rest balance. And all of that was, of course, impacting my body and causing frequent autoimmune flare-ups, as well as other autoimmune type of things were starting to come into play. But I started to explore more of the world of recovery as it applied to human performance, mostly because that was my job. And as I was doing that, I started to wonder whether these practices could help people living with autoimmune disease. I started to get this idea around improving human performance for people with autoimmune diseases. And I'd really only ever heard of the idea of improving human performance as it related to athletes. But now, at the job I was working at the time, I was applying those principles to the general population in corporate fitness. And I wanted to take it a step further and apply it to a unique population, the autoimmune community. I had this idea that if I can improve the function of my humanness, can I make myself more human and less autoimmune-y? I don't think that's really a word, but you get the idea. So I started to piece together this idea that if I could improve the things that made me more human, like improved movement, just better nutrition, better sleep and hydration, and my mindset, then my overall performance as a human being would increase and my autoimmunity would decrease. Wild, I know. What can I say? I'm a bit of a trailblazer. I say that jokingly because I know I didn't just like invent all of these things, but also no one, at least no one that I knew, was talking about it at the time. So I started to like implement and pay attention to these specific areas of recovery. And for a while, like you would hear me say, like, the secret to life is to pay attention. And I still say it sometimes, just not as much as I used to, but I mean, I do think that that is very true, that, paying attention is an important part of life, just, starting to increase your self-awareness. So I was going through this period of increasing awareness of my own body and realizing that, yes, those practices did indeed help me to manage autoimmune symptoms. And so like that became my mission, to help people implement not just exercise, but also recovery as a way to manage autoimmune symptoms. And so that's what I did through Healing in Motion. And at the end of 2020, I started going through the process of trademarking my business name. And then I realized, actually a lot of businesses have the name Healing in Motion. So if you're listening to this and you're saying, hey, that's my business name, don't worry, I'm not stealing your business name. In fact, you probably stole it from me. I'm just kidding. But anyways, so I couldn't trademark that name because so many other businesses had that same name. So I had to rename my business, and I renamed it to Remade Wellness, and that is what it is today. I have this like 3-step approach to working with clients: revive the mind-body connection, rebuild health, and reclaim life. And I said, well, if I revive, rebuild, reclaim, then what? And then it came to me. I said, I'm remade, right? If I revive my mind-body connection, I rebuild my health, and I reclaim my life, like it's this new remade version of me. And so that is where Remade Wellness was born. And actually, there's also a little bit of a backstory with Kintsugi Art, not Kintsugi Wellness. I think that's actually a book by Candice Kumai. Sorry if I mispronounced her name, but there is a book called Kintsugi Wellness. But what I wanted to say was that Kintsugi Art actually helped me to like inspire the name Remade Wellness. And it is an art practice of taking broken pottery and piecing it back together with gold that has been melted down into a liquid form, and you piece back together the broken pieces of pottery and put it back together, and now you have this new piece of pottery that is actually even more valuable than the original piece. And I realized that is exactly the story of autoimmunity, of just like taking these broken pieces and putting them back together. And the gold was this process of making yourself whole again through all these different wellness practices. But when I renamed my business Remade Wellness, that was actually just the beginning of this huge self-exploratory journey of being remade as a person. In 2022, I was working a full-time job. I was still at Exos. It was a job that I really enjoyed, but something about it just didn't feel quite right to me. I don't think it was anything specific about the job itself. It was more of, I don't think that was the right job for me. And so I started to experience this like really intense like burnout. I was just constantly drained. And I think it would have been easy for me to just say, oh, well, that's just my autoimmune disease, so I just have to deal with it. But I don't know, I think something in me just knew something wasn't right. And so I left that job and I decided to just take time to rest, But even after several months of resting, I still didn't feel rested. Like that's all I would do. Like I was just at home and I would rest, at least what I thought was resting. To be honest, I mean, I was just really on the couch watching TV a lot, but I never felt rested. So I remember one morning I went outside. I went to sit outside on my deck, and I sat down because I really like to like go outside and meditate in the mornings. But this particular morning, I just sat down and I asked God, what is keeping me from feeling better? Like, what is preventing me from moving forward from this burnout, from this like feeling of extreme exhaustion? And immediately, this image of a girl in a hospital bed came to me, and I knew exactly who that was. It was me when I was in high school going through the chemotherapy process. And I heard God say to me, it's time to release your identity as a sick person and embrace your identity as a healer. Whoa. That was such a transforming moment in my life. And I know like I will always tell that story as such a pivotal turning point in my life. Like I honestly felt like this huge weight had been lifted off of me, and it was like I had been reborn. And I like took this moment to like just thank her. Thank sick Daniela who was in the hospital bed. Because I realized that like even through my sickness, even through autoimmunity, like that version of me helped me to get my needs met, helped me to get to where I was in that moment. And I just had this like really interesting sense of gratitude for being sick and for autoimmunity. And in that moment, I just thanked her, and I sort of just like watched her fade away. And yeah, I mean, I felt like I had been reborn, and it was really a beautiful moment. And I thought that, you know, right after that, like things would start getting better and I would start feeling better. But that is not at all what happened. Actually, right after that is when I entered this season of intense depression and a lot of emotions that I had repressed from my childhood were coming up. What I had actually experienced was a psychosomatic connection being reestablished. This like mind-body connection that had been disconnected, dissociated for a long time had been reestablished in that moment. And all of the emotions that had been repressed and had manifested as physical symptoms in my body as lupus, those emotions were now coming to the surface so that I could actually deal with them. And as I worked through those emotions with my therapist to like unpack everything, I started to feel like I was truly meeting myself for the first time. Like I was coming home to me. And it was the first time that I actually accepted myself, along with my anger, my sadness, my joy, my fun side, my studious side, my adventurous side. Like I met Daniela. And around that same time, I was actually taking a course by one of my favorite mentors, Anna Hartman, focused on all of the body systems and how they like interact with each other. So of course I had learned anatomy and physiology in college, but this course was like helping me like piece together how the different systems interact with each other. So like in anatomy and physiology, sort of break down the body into the different systems, but I never felt like I got a sense of like putting it all back together again. So I was learning about the role of the nervous system on the body, specifically the immune system. And I started to kind of piece together things started to make sense to me. And I was like experiencing all of this for myself. I wasn't just like learning it, I was experiencing it in my own body. And as I started to address the repressed emotions, I also started to heal physically too. I started to dive deeper into the role of the emotions and how they create autoimmunity in the body. And I felt like I had like uncovered this like grand treasure that like no one else knew about. But of course, like the more I looked into autoimmunity through the lens of a whole body, whole mind approach, I started to find more and more resources on it and realize, wow, like there's so much that we can do to support the body and reverse autoimmune disease. And so I like started to implement everything I was learning, started to implement the practices that were aimed at restoring the body's healing, like emotional release practices, somatic practices, nervous system regulation, lymphatic work, and here I am today. Almost 3 months medication free after being on medication for almost 15 years. Like, wow. That's crazy to me. Like I started like doing a lot of this work at the end of 2022, and at the beginning of 2023 this year, I was released from my liver specialist. Like he said, I think that everything here is good. You can just like keep your care at your rheumatologist. Like you don't have to come back anymore. And to me, like that was such a big deal because I was like, okay, one less doctor's appointment. And a couple months later, I had an appointment with my rheumatologist, and I just threw the idea out there, not really knowing what he would say. Honestly, I expected him to say like, no, like I suggested that, can I come off of medication? And he just said, yeah, go for it. And I was really taken aback because I was just so shocked at how casual he was about it. But I mean, I think he knew that like I've always like tried to practice healthy lifestyles, and I've been seeing him for years, so like I think he had some trust in me to be able to say yes. And like here I am, almost 3 months medication free after being on medication for almost 15 years. And then after this like crazy transforming experience, like I'm healed. I'm truly remade. Now that doesn't mean I don't experience symptoms anymore, but I just experience them from a different perspective. And I can say I am truly remade. And as I've been learning all of this, I've also been teaching this to my clients in one-on-one restorative bodywork sessions on social media platforms, and now on this podcast. I teach movement and self-bodywork as a tool to release emotions, heal chronic symptoms, and then restore the body's natural ability to heal itself, because it can heal itself. And that's why I call myself a restorative movement practitioner, just bringing this episode full circle now. And so what that looks like in practice is guiding my clients through movement sessions and movement assessments that allow their body to speak, so that we can direct movement and body work to where the body says it needs it. And in doing so, the body starts to release tension and get into this place of healing and restoration, and can actually start to regulate the immune system. I really love the work that I'm doing now. Like this is important, right? It's not just strength training. I've been a strength coach for my entire career, but also incorporating these practices of restoration and healing, I think is so important, and such a huge missing piece of our healthcare. And I love it so much, I actually decided to go back to school. So right now I am enrolled in school getting my license as a massage therapist to incorporate even more tools to help myself and to help my clients live a life free of autoimmune disease. So that is the story of who I am. I'm Daniela and all that comes with her, what I do, and how I got to where I am now at the start of this medication-free life. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode helpful, or if any part of my story resonates with you, please connect with me. I am on social media, on Instagram at daniela.spear. I'll link it in the show notes as well. I definitely spend too much time on Instagram, so you could definitely DM me there or send me an email at hello@remadewellness.com. And I can't wait to hear from you. So until next time, my friends, be well.